The quickest way to underestimate someone is to mistake their uniform for the limit of their potential. The Grand Crescent Ballroom in downtown Chicago shimmered beneath towering crystal chandeliers, welcoming more than 300 of the nation's most influential investors, entrepreneurs, university presidents, and technology executives to the annual Future Capital Gala. Every polished marble floor reflected elegance. Every table displayed flawless white orchids beneath soft golden lights. Conversations about billion-dollar acquisitions floated effortlessly through the room, while a string quartet performed quietly in the background. It was the kind of evening where fortunes were discussed as casually as tomorrow's weather. Among the distinguished guests stood Nathan Brooks, a 35-year-old white billionaire whose investment company had become one of the fastest-growing financial firms in America. Dressed in a perfectly tailored midnight blue tuxedo, Nathan possessed the calm confidence of a man who had built an empire through intelligence, relentless discipline, and fearless decision-making. Business magazines admired him. Television networks requested interviews with him. Universities invited him to speak about leadership. Very few people ever challenged his opinions, and even fewer dared to question his confidence. Moving quietly between the elegantly dressed guests was Jasmine Reed, a 28-year-old black waitress employed by the ballroom's hospitality team. Wearing a simple black service uniform with her natural curls neatly gathered, she carried trays with effortless grace while greeting every guest with genuine kindness. Her warm brown eyes reflected attentiveness rather than intimidation, and despite spending hours surrounded by some of the wealthiest people in the country, she carried herself with quiet dignity instead of hesitation. To most guests, she was simply another member of the service staff whose presence blended naturally into the evening. As dinner concluded, a group of executives gathered around Nathan discussing a complex investment model that had recently attracted attention throughout the financial industry. One executive laughed while describing how even experienced analysts struggled to identify the hidden flaw inside the model. Another joked that solving the problem deserved a reward larger than most annual salaries. Nathan smiled before saying, "Anyone who can identify the mistake in less than 5 minutes deserves $1 million. Laughter spread around the circle. At that exact moment, Jasmine approached carrying fresh coffee for the table. She carefully placed each cup in front of the guests without interrupting their discussion. As she prepared to leave, her eyes briefly rested on the handwritten equations displayed across a digital tablet lying beside Nathan. It was only a glance, no longer than a heartbeat, but Nathan noticed. "Wait," he called confidently. Jasmine stopped and turned politely. "Yes, sir." Nathan picked up the tablet with a faint smile that immediately captured the attention of everyone nearby. "You seemed interested in our conversation." Jasmine answered honestly. "I was only making sure I did not spill the coffee near your notes." A few guests chuckled softly. Nathan held out the tablet. "Then perhaps you can settle a debate for us." More people gathered around, sensing entertainment. Someone jokingly repeated Nathan's promise of $1 million. Another guest quietly whispered that this should be interesting. Jasmine looked around the circle before politely shaking her head. "I do not believe I should interrupt your discussion." Nathan remained courteous, yet there was unmistakable amusement in his voice. "Surely there is no harm in trying. Consider it a challenge." The surrounding guests smiled with growing curiosity. Some expected nervous laughter. Others anticipated an awkward silence. Jasmine accepted the tablet with both hands and calmly studied the equations without reaching for a calculator, a notebook, or even a pen. The ballroom gradually became quieter as more conversations faded into the background. Within moments, dozens of guests found themselves watching a waitress standing in the center of one of the country's most prestigious financial gatherings, while a billionaire waited confidently for an answer that everyone assumed could only end one way. Jasmine held the tablet with steady hands, her expression unchanged despite dozens of curious eyes studying every movement she made. She silently examined the equations while the ballroom remained wrapped in an unusual stillness. Nathan folded his arms with quiet confidence, convinced that the challenge had already served its purpose. After all, the model had frustrated experienced analysts, veteran investors, and even several professors who had attempted to solve it during private conferences. Expecting a waitress to understand it seemed almost impossible. Nearly a full minute passed before Jasmine finally lifted her eyes from the screen. Instead of offering an answer immediately, she asked a calm and respectful question. May I ask whether this model assumes the market volatility remains independent across all three investment phases? Several executives exchanged puzzled glances. Nathan's faint smile hesitated for the first time. Yes, he replied cautiously. Jasmine nodded once. Then the problem is not in the calculation. The problem is in the assumption. A quiet murmur spread across the gathering. Nathan leaned forward slightly. Go on. Jasmine pointed gently toward a small section of the model displayed near the bottom of the page. Your algorithm treats investor behavior as though every decision happens in isolation. In reality, confidence compounds just as fear does. Once the first phase changes, the probability in the second phase is no longer independent. Every number after that point becomes increasingly inaccurate. One executive frowned before taking the tablet for a closer look. Another quickly opened the same model on his own laptop. Nathan remained silent, carefully following Jasmine's explanation. She continued without the slightest hint of arrogance. If you replace the independent probability with a conditional sequence, the projected return decreases by just over 11%. It still looks profitable on paper, but the hidden exposure nearly doubles during periods of market uncertainty. That is the mistake. The room became astonishingly quiet. Fingers rushed across keyboards as financial analysts repeated the calculations in real time. One by one, faces that had once carried amusement transformed into expressions of disbelief. Finally, an older investment director slowly lowered his glasses and looked directly at Nathan. She is correct. Another analyst stared at his screen before whispering almost to himself. Every projection changes. We completely overlooked the dependency. Within seconds, multiple confirmations echoed around the ballroom. The flaw was real. It had been hidden in plain sight all along. Nathan looked back at Jasmine, unable to disguise his surprise. For perhaps the first time in years, he found himself without an immediate response. The confidence that usually came so naturally was replaced by genuine curiosity. Where did you learn to analyze probability models like this? He asked quietly. Jasmine handed the tablet back with the same composure she had shown from the beginning. I simply recognized a familiar pattern. Nathan searched her face, expecting pride after such an extraordinary moment, but there was none. She did not celebrate. She did not seek applause. She merely smiled politely. If you will excuse me, the guests are still waiting for dessert. She turned and resumed serving the ballroom as though nothing remarkable had happened. Behind her, conversations erupted from every corner of the room. Some guests questioned how a waitress could identify a flaw that seasoned professionals had missed. Others wondered whether Nathan would still honor his promise of $1 million. Nathan barely heard them. His attention remained fixed on the woman who had quietly disappeared among the dining tables carrying another silver tray, moving with the same grace she had displayed before the challenge began. For reasons he could not yet explain, the most valuable mystery in the ballroom was no longer the mathematical model resting in his hands. It was the woman who had solved it without asking for recognition and walked away before anyone could even learn who she truly was. Jasmine finished serving the final tables as though the extraordinary moment had never happened. Guests continued whispering long after dessert had been placed before them, yet she greeted every person with the same calm smile and quiet professionalism. Nathan remained standing beside the executives, but his attention no longer belonged to the conversations around him. The financial model that had occupied his thoughts for weeks suddenly felt less important than the mystery surrounding the woman who had solved it without hesitation. Before leaving the ballroom that evening, he quietly approached the banquet manager. Who is she? He asked. The manager glanced toward Jasmine, who was collecting empty coffee cups near the far side of the room. Her name is Jasmine Reed. She has worked here for almost 4 years. Never late. Never complains. Every guest requests her section because she remembers names and treats everyone with respect. Nathan nodded slowly. Does she have a background in finance? The manager laughed softly. Not that I know of. She has never talked about herself very much. That answer only deepened Nathan's curiosity. The following morning, while the city awakened beneath a gray Chicago sky, Nathan arrived early at the headquarters of Brooks Capital. Instead of beginning his usual schedule of investment meetings, he asked his executive assistant to locate any publicly available information about Jasmine Reed. The request surprised her. Within an hour, a small file rested on Nathan's desk. There was almost nothing inside. Employment history showed only restaurants, hotels, and catering companies. No graduate degree. No published research. No professional awards. It was the profile of someone who had quietly worked ordinary jobs for years. Yet one detail caught Nathan's attention. Jasmine had once attended the University of Illinois before withdrawing during her junior year. There was no explanation. Nathan leaned back in his chair, unable to understand how someone with such remarkable analytical ability could simply disappear from the academic world. Later that afternoon, curiosity led him to visit the university himself. He requested a brief conversation with an administrator who specialized in alumni records. After several minutes of searching, the woman behind the desk looked at him with visible surprise. "Jasmine Reed," she repeated. "I remember hearing about her. She was considered one of the brightest mathematics students the department had seen in years." Nathan felt his heartbeat quicken. "What happened?" The administrator sighed gently. "She left unexpectedly. Her mother became seriously ill, and Jasmine chose to leave school to become her full-time caregiver. She declined several scholarship extensions because she said her family needed her more than any classroom did." Nathan remained silent. The image in his mind of the composed waitress carrying silver trays suddenly blended with the picture of a gifted young woman quietly walking away from an extraordinary future without resentment or public recognition. Before leaving campus, Nathan stopped outside the mathematics building where a bronze plaque honored students who had achieved exceptional academic distinction. Among the engraved names from years earlier, one stood out: Jasmine Reed. Beneath her name appeared a single line recognizing her for producing one of the highest scores ever recorded in the university's advanced mathematical reasoning competition. Nathan stared at the inscription for several long moments. The woman everyone had mistaken for ordinary had once been celebrated by one of the country's respected mathematics departments. Yet she had never mentioned it. She had never corrected anyone who underestimated her. As he walked back toward his car beneath the quiet autumn trees, Nathan realized that the greatest difference between success and significance might not be talent at all. It might be the quiet strength to carry extraordinary gifts without ever demanding that the world notice them. Jasmine arrived for her evening shift just before 5 o'clock, tying on the same black service apron she had worn hundreds of times before. Nothing about her routine suggested that the previous evening had changed her life. She greeted the kitchen staff, checked the reservation list, polished glassware, and quietly prepared the dining room before the first guests arrived. Her co-workers chatted excitedly about the unusual scene from the gala, but Jasmine gently redirected every compliment with a warm smile. "It was only a conversation," she said. "Everyone has something they are good at." Meanwhile, Nathan found himself unable to concentrate during a meeting that normally would have held his complete attention. Charts filled the conference room screens, executives debated quarterly forecasts, and attorneys discussed the details of an upcoming acquisition. Yet his thoughts repeatedly returned to the university records and the bronze plaque bearing Jasmine's name. By late afternoon, he made an unexpected decision. Canceling the remainder of his schedule, he drove back to the hotel where the gala had been held. The restaurant manager recognized him immediately and welcomed him with professional courtesy. Nathan requested a quiet table near the windows overlooking the Chicago River. Within minutes, Jasmine approached with a menu, maintaining the same calm professionalism she offered every guest. When she recognized him, there was a brief moment of surprise in her eyes before she smiled politely. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks. Welcome back." Nathan returned the smile, although this time there was no trace of playful confidence. "Thank you. I was hoping you might have a few minutes to talk after your shift ends." Jasmine hesitated only slightly. "If the manager approves, I can spare a little time." Nathan nodded with appreciation. "I will wait." 2 hours later, after the last dinner guests had departed and the restaurant lights softened into the quiet atmosphere of closing time, they sat across from each other in a small cafe located beside the hotel lobby. Neither expensive suits nor service uniforms seemed to matter in the peaceful setting. Nathan placed 2 cups of coffee on the table before speaking carefully. "I visited your university today." Jasmine lowered her eyes for a moment, but did not appear upset. Then you learned more than I intended anyone here to know. Nathan answered honestly. I learned that you were considered one of the most gifted mathematics students in the program. Jasmine wrapped both hands around her coffee cup without looking away. That was a long time ago. Nathan studied her expression. Why did you never tell anyone? She smiled softly, though there was sadness behind her eyes. Because my job is to serve dinner, not my resume. Guests come here to enjoy an evening, not to hear about opportunities one could not finish. Nathan remained silent, allowing her words to settle between them. After a few moments, she continued. When my mother became ill, every decision became simple. She needed me. Mathematics could wait. Life could not. Nathan realized there was no regret in her voice, only acceptance. Do you ever wish you had chosen differently? Jasmine looked through the cafe window toward the city lights reflecting across the river. Sometimes I miss solving difficult problems, but I have never regretted choosing my family. Success means very little if the people you love have to face hardship alone. Nathan slowly nodded. The answer revealed far more about Jasmine than any academic record ever could. As the conversation ended and Jasmine prepared to leave, Nathan noticed a small notebook resting beside her purse. Its worn leather cover was filled with tiny handwritten equations visible along the edges of loose pages tucked inside. She noticed him looking at it, smiled gently, and slipped it into her bag before quietly saying, "Some dreams never disappear. They simply learn how to wait." Those words lingered in Nathan's mind long after she walked away, because for the first time in many years he realized he had just met someone whose greatest wealth had never appeared on a balance sheet. 3 evenings later, the restaurant welcomed another distinguished gathering. Although this event felt quieter than the glamorous gala that had unexpectedly changed Nathan's perspective. Jasmine moved through the dining room with the same quiet confidence that defined every shift, never drawing attention to herself, even though several returning guests recognized her as the woman who had solved the famous financial puzzle. She politely accepted their compliments before continuing her work without lingering in conversation. Nathan arrived shortly before sunset, not as the celebrated billionaire everyone expected, but simply as a dinner guest who requested the same corner table overlooking the Chicago River. This time he did not come searching for answers about mathematics. He came because he wanted to understand the remarkable character behind the extraordinary intelligence. As Jasmine refilled his coffee, an elderly gentleman entering the restaurant suddenly stopped in the middle of the dining room. His eyes widened with disbelief before slowly filling with emotion. "Jasmine?" he asked softly. She turned toward the familiar voice, and for the first time since Nathan had met her, genuine surprise crossed her face. "Professor Hayes?" she replied almost in disbelief. Nathan quietly watched as the distinguished man approached. Professor Eleanor Hayes, one of the nation's most respected mathematics scholars, smiled warmly before shaking Jasmine's hand with unmistakable admiration. "I have spent years wondering where life had taken you," the professor said. "I never imagined I would find you here." Several nearby guests looked up with curiosity as Jasmine modestly answered, "Life had different plans." Professor Hayes laughed gently. "Different plans, perhaps, but certainly not different abilities." Turning toward Nathan, who had risen politely from his chair, the professor asked, "You know Jasmine?" Nathan nodded. "We met a few nights ago." Professor Hayes smiled knowingly. "Then you have already discovered what many brilliant people overlooked. During my entire academic career, I taught thousands of gifted students, but only a handful possessed Jasmine's rare combination of analytical precision and intuitive reasoning. She did not simply solve equations. She understood why they existed." Jasmine lowered her eyes with quiet embarrassment. "Professor, that was many years ago. Excellence does not disappear because time passes," Professor Hayes answered kindly. "It simply waits for someone to recognize it again." Nathan listened carefully while the professor continued. When Jasmine was 20 years old, several research institutions wanted to recruit her before she had even graduated. One federal research fellowship described her as a future leader in mathematical modeling. Then one day she came into my office and quietly told me she had to withdraw because her mother needed full-time care. I tried everything to convince her to postpone the decision. Scholarship extensions, emergency grants, flexible schedules. She thanked me for every offer, but she said something I have never forgotten. The professor looked proudly toward Jasmine before repeating her exact words. Knowledge can be earned again. Time with the people you love cannot. The restaurant fell unusually quiet around their table. Nathan felt those words settle deeply within him because they revealed a strength no financial success could measure. Professor Hayes reached into his briefcase and removed a folded program from an old university awards ceremony. Carefully opening it, he showed Nathan a photograph taken years earlier. Standing at the center of the stage, smiling with youthful confidence while accepting the department's highest academic honor, was Jasmine Reed. Nathan compared the image with the woman standing beside the table in a simple service uniform. The years had changed her circumstances, but not the quiet dignity reflected in her eyes. As Professor Hayes prepared to leave, he placed a gentle hand on Jasmine's shoulder and said, "The world may have forgotten your gifts for a little while, but gifts like yours were never meant to remain hidden forever." Nathan watched Jasmine carefully as she folded the old program and thanked her former professor with sincere gratitude. In that quiet moment, he realized the greatest mystery was no longer how she had solved a million-dollar problem. The real mystery was how someone with a mind admired by the finest scholars in the country had remained invisible for so many years while carrying her brilliance with such remarkable humility. Nathan returned to Brooks Capital the following morning carrying far more than meeting notes and financial reports. For the first time in years, his thoughts were occupied not by mergers, quarterly earnings, or investment forecasts, but by a single realization that refused to leave his mind. He had built an entire career on evaluating potential, yet he had nearly overlooked one of the most extraordinary minds he had ever encountered simply because she had been wearing a service uniform. The irony unsettled him throughout the day. During an executive strategy meeting, analysts presented projections for a major technology investment, but Nathan found himself paying closer attention to how quickly people accepted titles and appearances as proof of ability. When the meeting ended, he remained alone in the conference room, staring through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. Success had taught him how to recognize opportunity inside companies, but Jasmine had revealed that he had become dangerously blind when evaluating people. That evening he returned to the restaurant once again, although this visit felt different from the previous ones. He was no longer driven by curiosity. He came carrying something far more difficult for a man accustomed to confidence: humility. Jasmine greeted him with the same warm professionalism she showed every guest. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks. It is nice to see you again." Nathan smiled sincerely. "May I ask you for a favor after your shift?" She nodded politely. "Of course." Several hours later, they sat once more in the quiet cafe beside the lobby. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Nathan rested his hands on the table before taking a slow breath. "I owe you an apology." Jasmine looked at him with calm curiosity, but remained silent, allowing him to continue. "The night we met, I believed I was offering an entertaining challenge. Looking back, I realize I was also making an assumption. I saw your uniform before I saw you. I judged your profession instead of your ability. I have spent years telling young entrepreneurs never to ignore hidden opportunities, yet I ignored one standing directly in front of me." Jasmine listened without interruption. There was no satisfaction in her expression, only quiet attentiveness. Nathan continued, his voice carrying genuine regret. "I embarrassed you in front of an entire ballroom, even if I convinced myself it was harmless. For that, I am sincerely sorry." Jasmine remained thoughtful for a few seconds before answering softly, "Thank you for saying that. It takes courage to admit when we have been wrong." Nathan lowered his eyes briefly. "I should have shown that courage sooner." A gentle smile appeared on Jasmine's face. "People often believe respect begins after someone proves their value. I have always believed respect should come first. Then we discover each other's value naturally." Her words settled deeply into Nathan's heart because they carried neither accusation nor resentment. Instead of making him feel smaller, they quietly invited him to become better. He looked at her with genuine admiration. "You could have embarrassed me that night. Everyone would have applauded if you had." Jasmine smiled gently. "Winning an argument is easy. Preserving someone's dignity is much harder. I preferred the second choice." Nathan felt an unexpected weight behind those simple words. Throughout his career, he had celebrated intelligence, ambition, and determination. Yet sitting across from Jasmine, he realized there was another kind of greatness that rarely appeared on resumes or financial statements. It was the quiet strength to answer arrogance with grace instead of revenge. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Nathan stood and extended his hand, not as a billionaire greeting a waitress, but as one professional acknowledging another. Jasmine accepted the handshake with a warm smile, and for the first time since they had met, neither of them noticed the difference between the tailored suit and the simple uniform. In that brief moment, the distance created by wealth, status, and assumptions quietly disappeared, replaced by something far more valuable than admiration alone. It was the beginning of genuine respect. Nathan spent the next several days reflecting on every conversation he had shared with Jasmine. The more he considered her quiet wisdom, the more convinced he became that someone with her insight deserved an opportunity far beyond carrying trays through crowded dining rooms. Yet he also remembered everything she had said about dignity, family, and earning respect without demanding attention. He understood that whatever he offered next could not feel like charity. It had to recognize her ability rather than her circumstances. Early Monday morning, Nathan asked his executive assistant to arrange a private meeting in one of the smaller conference rooms at Brooks Capital. Instead of inviting board members or investors, he requested only one guest. Later that afternoon, Jasmine arrived wearing a simple navy business suit she had borrowed from a close friend after finishing her morning shift. She entered the headquarters with quiet confidence, politely greeting the receptionist before being escorted upstairs. The walls displayed photographs celebrating major acquisitions and business milestones, but Jasmine admired something else entirely. She noticed framed portraits of the company's earliest employees, each accompanied by a short description of how they had helped build the firm from the beginning. When Nathan welcomed her into the conference room, there were no cameras, no executives, and no publicity. Only 2 chairs, 2 cups of coffee, and a folder resting neatly on the table. "Thank you for coming," he said sincerely. Jasmine smiled. "Thank you for inviting me." Nathan pushed the folder toward her. "Before you open it, I want you to understand why you are here. This is not a reward for solving one mathematical problem. It is not an apology disguised as generosity. It is an invitation based entirely on merit." Jasmine slowly opened the folder. Inside was an official offer to join Brooks Capital as a strategic research consultant on a newly created analytical innovation team. The position included flexible hours, full educational sponsorship if she wished to complete her degree, and complete access to the company's research resources. She quietly read every page before closing the folder again. Nathan waited patiently. After several moments, she looked up. "This is an extraordinary opportunity." Nathan nodded. "I believe you earned it long before we met." Jasmine remained thoughtful before asking one simple question. Why create a new position instead of hiring someone who already has the credentials? Nathan answered without hesitation. "Because credentials measure what someone has completed. Character measures what someone is capable of becoming. You have already shown me both." Jasmine smiled appreciatively, but she did not immediately accept. Instead, she folded her hands and spoke with the same calm honesty that had always guided her. "If I join your company, I need one promise." Nathan leaned forward. "Name it." Jasmine met his eyes directly. "Treat me as an equal colleague, not as the woman from the restaurant whose story inspires people. I do not want special treatment. I do not want sympathy. I want honest expectations, difficult problems, and the chance to earn every achievement through my work." Nathan smiled, recognizing that this condition revealed exactly why she belonged there. "You have my word," he replied. "From the moment you walk through these doors, you will be judged by the quality of your ideas and nothing else." Jasmine extended her hand across the table. "Then I accept." Their handshake carried none of the imbalance that had existed on the night they first met. It was the beginning of a true professional partnership built upon mutual respect rather than assumptions. As Jasmine prepared to leave, Nathan glanced toward the empty chair beside the conference table and imagined how many remarkable people might never receive opportunities simply because no one had taken the time to look beyond appearances. He silently promised himself that Brooks Capital would become the kind of company where talent could never again be hidden behind a uniform, a title, or the expectations of others. 3 weeks after Jasmine joined Brooks Capital, the atmosphere inside the headquarters had begun to change in subtle but meaningful ways. Employees who had initially wondered why a former waitress had been invited onto the analytical innovation team quickly discovered that she asked thoughtful questions no one else considered. Rather than trying to impress people with complicated language, she listened carefully, identified hidden assumptions, and encouraged every member of the team to explain not only what they believed, but why they believed it. Nathan noticed that meetings became more collaborative whenever Jasmine was present. Instead of competing to sound the smartest person in the room, analysts started examining problems from multiple perspectives. One Monday morning, however, the company faced its most significant decision of the year. Brooks Capital was preparing to invest nearly $400 million into an emerging technology company that promised revolutionary advances in predictive logistics. Months of research had convinced almost everyone that the acquisition represented an extraordinary opportunity. The boardroom filled with senior executives, legal advisors, economists, and outside consultants. Presentation after presentation concluded with the same recommendation: approve the investment. Nathan listened carefully before inviting final comments. As the room prepared to vote, Jasmine quietly raised her hand. The room became still. Nathan nodded respectfully. Please share your thoughts. Jasmine stood and walked toward the large digital screen displaying the financial projections. She studied the charts for several silent moments before asking a simple question. Has anyone compared the customer retention assumptions against regional infrastructure data collected during the past 18 months? Several executives exchanged uncertain glances. One consultant answered confidently. Those variables were already incorporated into the model. Jasmine smiled politely. I believe they were incorporated separately, but not together. She requested permission to connect her laptop to the presentation system. Within seconds, a new series of charts appeared beside the existing projections. Instead of criticizing anyone's work, she calmly demonstrated how two independent datasets created a misleading impression when analyzed in isolation. She carefully explained that recent infrastructure delays would likely affect long-term customer behavior, causing the projected growth rate to decline far more rapidly than anyone had expected. The room remained silent as analysts verified her calculations. One after another, financial specialists repeated the analysis using their own software. Every result pointed toward the same conclusion. The proposed investment carried significantly greater risk than the original report suggested. The chief financial officer slowly removed his glasses before speaking in disbelief. If we had approved this acquisition today, our downside exposure would have increased dramatically within 2 years. Another executive quietly added, we all reviewed these reports dozens of times, yet none of us connected the variables the way she did. Nathan looked toward Jasmine with genuine admiration, but she simply returned to her seat without celebrating. There was no expression of triumph, only quiet satisfaction that the company now possessed a clearer understanding of the facts. After several minutes of discussion, the board unanimously voted to postpone the acquisition pending additional research. Independent analysts later confirmed that the revised assessment had likely prevented hundreds of millions of dollars in unnecessary risk. News of the decision spread quickly throughout the company. Employees who had once questioned Jasmine's presence now approached her with sincere respect, asking thoughtful questions and inviting her perspective during future projects. Later that evening, Nathan stood beside the conference room windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, while Jasmine gathered her notes. You changed the direction of this company today, he said quietly. Jasmine smiled with her familiar humility. I only asked one more question before accepting the first answer. Nathan nodded thoughtfully because he realized that the greatest breakthroughs rarely began with extraordinary confidence. More often, they began with the quiet courage to challenge assumptions that everyone else had already accepted as truth. 6 months later, the annual Brooks Capital Shareholders Summit filled one of Chicago's largest convention centers with investors, business leaders, employees, university partners, and young entrepreneurs eager to hear Nathan's vision for the company's future. The stage featured a simple design without extravagant decorations, reflecting the values Nathan had worked hard to strengthen since the evening that had quietly transformed his understanding of leadership. Behind him, a large screen displayed the company's newest guiding principle: potential deserves opportunity. As applause settled, Nathan stepped to the podium and looked across the audience with thoughtful composure. Instead of opening with financial achievements or market performance, he smiled gently and began with a personal story. Several months ago, he said, I believed I was testing someone else's intelligence. In reality, life was testing my character. The audience listened attentively as Nathan described the unforgettable evening when he had challenged a waitress with a difficult mathematical problem before a room filled with influential people. He admitted that he had mistaken a uniform for a limitation and status for proof of ability. There was no attempt to excuse his behavior or soften the lesson. He accepted full responsibility for the assumptions he had made and explained how one calm answer had changed the way he evaluated every person who entered his company. Nathan then invited Jasmine onto the stage. The audience rose in warm applause as she walked forward wearing a professional Navy business suit instead of the restaurant uniform she had once worn. She accepted the recognition with the same quiet grace that had always defined her, thanking the audience with a modest smile before standing beside Nathan. He continued, "Many people believe this story is about mathematics. It is not. Mathematics only revealed something much more important. Talent can be hidden. Character can be overlooked. Potential can remain invisible when we allow appearances to make our decisions for us." He then announced a new national scholarship and mentorship initiative funded by Brooks Capital to support students whose education had been interrupted while caring for family members or overcoming unexpected hardships. The program would evaluate applicants not only by academic records, but also by perseverance, integrity, and demonstrated character. The announcement received a standing ovation, yet Nathan quietly turned toward Jasmine before the applause ended. "This program exists because one person reminded me that opportunity should never belong only to those who are already visible." Jasmine thanked him sincerely before addressing the audience herself. Every person in this room will meet someone whose abilities are hidden beneath ordinary circumstances. Before deciding what they can do, take the time to discover who they are. Respect is often the first opportunity we give another human being. Her words filled the convention center with thoughtful silence before another wave of applause echoed throughout the hall. Later that afternoon, after the guests had departed and the lights inside the convention center gradually dimmed, Nathan and Jasmine stood together overlooking the Chicago River where the city's skyline reflected across the calm water. Nathan smiled as he remembered the night everything had begun with a single challenge worth $1 million. "Do you know something?" he asked softly. Jasmine looked toward him with quiet curiosity. Nathan laughed gently. "The most valuable answer I ever received was never about numbers." Jasmine smiled knowingly. Sometimes the greatest equations cannot be solved with mathematics. They are solved by changing the way we see people. Nathan nodded, realizing those words would remain with him for the rest of his life. Wealth had built his success, but humility had transformed his leadership. Intelligence had earned Jasmine admiration, but her kindness had earned lasting respect. And together they proved that the true value of a person is never measured by a title, a uniform, or the expectations of strangers, but by the character they quietly carry when no one is looking.